The Serengeti plains were bathed in bright sunlight that made a huge golden sea that went all the way to the distance. A female cheetah named Amara stood in the waist-high savanna grass and quietly watched a group of Thompson's gazelles about 100 meters away. Her hair was a mysterious gold in color with black spots. Her 3 kids were lying down in the grass. As a child, Amara learned to be patient from their mother. Her sharp eyes not only found possible prey, but also kept an eye out for any danger. She had just lost her mate to poachers 4 months before, so she had to raise the 3 kids by herself. It wasn't far away that American photographer James Mitchell, 54, sat on the ground with his camera pointed at the cheetah family. Mitchell had salt and pepper hair and sun-damaged skin. He had been photographing wildlife for 40 years and had learned how to blend in and wait for the right moment without getting in the way of the animal's natural routine. James had been to the Serengeti before, but this trip was especially important to him. His Boston home seemed strangely empty after his only son moved out to go to college. Because he felt empty, he went back to Africa with a new photography project to record family ties in the animal world. As Amara moved, her thin body seemed to blend into the golden color of the grassland. The kids moved slowly and low like their mother. As James held his breath, he pressed a lock. The camera's soft sound could be heard in the quiet air. He saw Amara teaching her kids how to get close to prey through the lens. It wasn't a real hunt, it was just a lesson. James thought of the years he spent teaching his son to fish by Lake Michigan when he saw Amara's movements and the way she led her kids. The same kind of patience and deep love shown through simple acts. James went back to the same spot every day. He kept an eye on the cheetah family and wrote about how Amara taught her kids to hunt, how she kept them safe from bigger animals, and the rare times when mother and cubs played together. It wasn't just a picture of nature in each picture. Pieces of a story about being a mother and making it through life. A story that James felt he had to tell. It all changed in the late afternoon of the last day of the month. The guests in their jeep got too close to the cheetah family, which made Amara and her cubs run away. In the chaos, Amara's cub, who had the brightest eyes and was the most interested in everything, got split from the rest of the family. James saw what was going on and felt angry. As soon as the last jeep drove off, he got closer and saw the scared little cub shaking in the bushes. James stood still, keeping a safe distance while still being close enough for Amara to see him. When the mother cheetah came out of the bush, she was tense and alert. They looked at each other and had a strange moment of understanding. James moved slowly back, letting Amara get close to her cub. She looked back at James one last time as she led the baby back to its brothers. Not a mean or scared look, but one of understanding and maybe even thanks. That event changed everything. James was no longer just a spectator when he looked through his camera lens. He was now part of the story. In his small tent at the safari camp, James looked over the pictures from the day and came to a realization. In this harsh natural world, Amara wasn't just fighting off natural predators. She was also constantly being threatened by people who came too close. The Serengeti was still very green and full of animals, but jeeps full of tourists, low-flying hot air balloons, and even shooters like him were slowly upsetting the ecosystem's delicate balance. The stars in Africa were bright that night, and James wrote in his journal, "Maybe I came here to find a story about motherhood in the wild, but I'm discovering another story about responsibility, the line between observing and taking part, and the cost of human curiosity." On the Serengeti plains, the dry season was almost over. Shorter, yellower grass grew where there were still water sources, and herds of animals on the move collected there. This was both a chance and a challenge for Amara and her 3 cubs. Prey was easier to get to, but lions, hyenas, and leopards were also after it, which put her small family in danger. James had changed how he did things. He stopped just taking pictures of the cheetah family and started writing about what was going on in a bigger picture. Tourist jeeps are speeding across the grassland, making clouds of dust. Tourists making a lot of noise and messing with natural hunting routines and times when animals had to change how they behave because of people. James saw something that made his heart ache early one morning when the sun was still soft on the fields. Amara had been able to catch a young zebra. 3 tourist jeeps circled them before Amara could bring the kill back to her hungry cubs. She had to leave her kill and run away. After less than 5 minutes, a group of hyenas showed up and took the hunting prize. Her kids would not eat for another day. James was mad and sorry for what he did. He was mad at the careless guides and felt bad about himself because he was part of the problem. He started talking to other safari guides, park managers, and even tourists, telling them what he had seen and pushing for safer ways for tourists to enjoy the park. James's pictures started to tell a new story. They weren't just about the beauty of animals, they were also about how complicated the relationship between people and nature is. His photo series, Fragile Boundaries, was featured in a well-known magazine and caused a lot of debate in the conservation community. Some people said James was pushing the problem too far. Others praised him for bringing up a part of ecotourism that is often forgotten. At the same time, James's bond with the cheetah family continued to grow in silence. Amara seemed to be used to him being there, and she would sometimes bring her cubs closer to her. James started to notice that each of the three little ones had their own unique personality. The oldest, she was strong and careful like her mother. The middle cub was the fastest and bravest, and the youngest cub was the most curious and smart. He often looked at James with genuine interest. In the afternoon, a big storm came up out of the blue. Winds whipped across the plains, and it rained so hard it looked like a waterfall. James quickly looked for safety under a big rock and was shocked to see Amara and her kids already there. People and cheetahs shared warmth and safety in a small area. James didn't move, but his heart was beating fast. He wasn't scared. Before going back to take care of her kids, Amara only looked at him once. Rarely do people trust each other so much. As soon as the rain stopped, James took his best picture. A rainbow stretched across the sky behind Amara and her three cubs as they stood on a rocky ledge. They were wet, but proud. That picture, called Resilience, became a sign of hope and survival. James faced his toughest test near the end of his third month in the Serengeti. The cheetah family was being chased by a group of lions, so Amara had to take her kids to new territory close to the tourist area. It was so loud on the fields that night that James couldn't sleep because he was scared. The next morning, he found Amara with a deep scratch on her shoulder, but she was still living and taking care of her cubs. James couldn't stand by, even though his professional instincts told him to just watch and write down what he saw. He hid himself away from the cheetah family and put a bowl of clean water and a piece of meat near where they were hidden. The golden rule of wildlife photos is to not get in the way of the animals. People in the safari world were very angry when the story got around. A different photographer told James straight out, "You're no longer an observer. You're becoming part of the ecosystem, and that's dangerous for you and the animals." James knew they were right, but he couldn't deny the special bond he had formed with the cheetah family. It was no longer just a picture project. It turned into a personal trip, a story about duty and connection. In his diary, James said, "Perhaps I've crossed the boundary of a photographer, but I found another boundary where humans can interact with nature, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as part of the same complex web of life." When the wet season came to the Serengeti, the dry yellow plains turned into a huge sea of green. There were wildflowers everywhere, and new life sprung up. After 6 months of watching the cheetah family, James could tell that things had changed. The cubs that Amara had were no longer small and awkward. Each of them had grown into a good young hunter with their own style and attitude. James named the first child Maya. She was careful, smart, and patient, just like her mother. Zuri, the middle cub, was the bravest and often led the other cubs on chases and adventures. And Taji, the youngest, stayed the most interesting and well-behaved animal. She often looked around at everything with great care. James knew that his time in the Serengeti was almost up. The publisher told him to finish his picture book, and next month his son would be visiting. It would be the first time they saw each other in almost a year. But he wanted to spend one last moment with the cheetah family before he left. Early in the morning, James saw Amara showing her cubs one last thing, how to hunt on their own. She patiently showed him how to get close, how to figure out how far away they were, and the exact moment to start chasing. James recorded every moment because he knew he was seeing routine that goes back as far as life itself, getting children ready for life as an adult. Michael, James's 20-year-old son, showed up on time. He is tall and thin, and his eyes are just as curious as his dad's. At first, Michael wasn't sure why his dad was so interested in the cheetah family. "They're just big cats," he said lightly. Michael's mood slowly changed after James took his son to meet Amara and her cubs from a safe distance. James said in a whisper, Look at how she teaches them. They were watching Maya do her first hunt by herself. It's no different from how I taught you to fish or fix your bicycle or take your first photograph. Michael was quiet for a long time and then gave a nod. I get it now, he said. This isn't just about cheetahs. It's about us. During their last few days in the Serengeti, James and Michael took pictures of the cheetah family as well as the scenery, the ecosystem, and the subtleties of the relationships between all the living things in it. They saw an important event, Maya's first successful hunt. That night, James and Michael smiled knowingly when Amara let Maya eat first, which was a sign that she was ready to be an adult. Michael said as they got back to camp, I think I should switch my major from business to conservation biology. There was a sad feeling the day James left the Serengeti. He went back to the place he had been before on his last morning in hopes of seeing the cheetah family one last time. He was getting ready to leave when he noticed something moving in the tall grass. They weren't there. As he watched from a safe distance, Taji, the youngest and almost adult, was there. Even though she wasn't a child anymore, her eyes were still very curious. James raised his camera and took one last picture. Taji was going into the bush when he put the camera down. James's picture book, Children of the Savannah, came out a year later and quickly became a classic in the field of wildlife photography, not only for the lovely pictures of the cheetah family, but also for the story behind them. This is a story about being a mother, growing up, and the complicated bond between people and nature. Many people were moved to tears by Michael's introduction to the book. This is the story of a man who went looking for a story about cheetahs, but discovered a story about himself, about fatherhood, about letting go, and about finding connection in the most unexpected places. James gave half of the money from the book's sales to a new conservation fund whose goal is to encourage responsible travel and protect Africa's big cats. A portion of the money was used to teach local tour guides how to approach animals without getting in the way of their normal behavior. Michael changed his subject, and 2 years later, on his first field trip as a conservation biology student, he went back to the Serengeti. James went with him and brought his camera for a different reason. He wasn't just a shooter this time, he was also teaching and telling stories. Even though some things had changed, the grassland was still green as ever. Because of James's work as an advocate, new rules about safe distances from wildlife have been put in place. There were still a lot of tourists, but there were small but meaningful changes in how they connected with nature. Michael and James looked for the cheetah family all afternoon, not sure if they would still be able to find Amara and her kids. Cheetahs don't live very long in the wild. After 2 years, a lot of things could have changed. As the savannah turned a brilliant gold-colored dusk, they saw a familiar shape on top of a small hill, an adult female cheetah looking out over the grassland. James could tell that person was watching him from afar because of their unique stance and alert behavior. "It was Maya," he whispered. "That's Maya." The cheetah, which was now an adult, turned her head towards them as if she heard the call, and then from behind her, 3 small figures came out. They were her cubs, the savannah's new generation. James had a tear run down his face. The circle was no longer open. Life went on as tough as the desert itself. He raised his camera not to change or get involved, but to record the always beautiful wildlife. Michael put his hand on his dad's shoulder. "Now I get it," he said, about letting go and letting things happen as they will. James could only nod and not speak. At that moment, he wasn't just a father or a shooter. He was also a part of a bigger story about life and death, about giving and taking, about people and nature. It was getting darker, so Maya led her cubs down from the mound and into the grassland. James put his camera down, but not to take another picture. He already remembered the most beautiful picture, not because of its light and color, but because of how it made him feel and what it meant to him. Even the best camera can't catch some things, he told Michael as they walked back to camp. They stopped on top of a hill on the way back to see the grassland spread out in the moonlight. A cheetah's call could be heard far away in the dark. It wasn't the growl of a dangerous animal, but a gentle reminder that the Serengeti was still wild, free, and full of stories ready to be told. James came to find a story about animals, but what he found was more important. In Nature's Hug, everyone is a part of the same story that never ends. People, cheetahs, grasses, the sun, and the moon. A story that has no real starting or end, just endless cycles of being born again and again. That might have been the most important thing the desert could teach people who were willing to learn it, that there is a new beginning at the end of every story. And every goodbye hides the hope of another meeting. James got a letter from a young wildlife activist in Serengeti many years later, when he was in his 70s. A picture of a female cheetah standing tall on a rock was sent with the letter. The letter said, "We think this is Maya's third-generation descendant." The local community calls this lineage the Mitchell family, named after the man who taught them to see cheetahs not just as wild animals, but as individuals with their own stories and dignity. James smiled as his old hands went over the picture. He didn't have to go back to the Serengeti to see the grassland. It was still there, wild and free. The children of the grassland would keep telling their stories as long as people learned to value and protect nature. He was lucky enough to be a part of some of these stories. The first picture he had taken of Amara and her 3 cubs was on his desk next to the new one. It had faded over time, but it was still beautiful. 2 pictures taken almost 20 years apart tell a story that words alone could not fully describe. A story about love that knows no bounds, connections that go beyond time, and the sacred duty we all have to take care of this world and all the living things that inhabit it. James was old enough to know that he might not get to see the next generation of cheetahs, but that didn't bother him anymore. The most important thing he learned from the savannah was that no one person is important in and of themselves, but everyone is important to the bigger picture. We go through life like cheetahs, but the story goes on, eternal and always new, like the grassland. That, in the end, was James Mitchell's real impact. It's not just the pretty pictures or well-loved books that make us feel like we can find general truths about our own lives in the wild savannah, in a cheetah mother's love that doesn't change, and in her brave cubs growing up. James went outside to his small house on the Maine coast as night fell and looked up at the stars. The same stars that still shine every night over the Serengeti plains. At that moment, there seemed to be no separation between the past and the present, between people and nature, or between the camera and the subject. There was only one story left, the story of life, with all its joy, pain, beauty, and hope. An interesting story that James felt proud to share, but that was never really his. It was from the wild. The children of the desert owned it. It was now owned by everyone who had read, seen, and felt the simple but strong message it sent. That even though the world is busy and unstable, there are still wild places where mother's strength and the beauty of life can be found in their purest forms. And as long as those places are around, there is hope for everyone, cheetahs and people, young and old, hunters and stories.